Three, two, one, live. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Shalev, and I'm very happy to see all of you on our Test Containers live stream here on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already. And today is a special episode where we have the most amazing guest in the recent history of guests, which is, of course, Sergei. Hi, Sergei. How are you doing?
Oleg, you're not supposed to lie. I'm not just the most amazing guest. We had such great guests before me. But happy to be here. Hey,
Yes.
everyone.
Yes, we had an amazing cast of previous episodes, but you also in the hierarchy above me in the atomic jar. Uh, hierarchy. So like I have a soft spot for that. Anyway, if you don't know Sergey is a brilliant engineer. He's a CEO of AtomicJar, one of the core maintainers of test containers libraries uh, since forever. I think you were one of the first three or four core people, um,
Guilty.
and contributed to other languages implementations. Ex-member of Spring Team, where he did very cool things with the reactive stack and probably other things that I don't know about. And currently is implementing the role of CEO, which is probably very interesting. Where are you connecting from today?
Well, thanks for this warm introduction. I'm currently in Brooklyn, New York, where I moved 2 years ago. We're previously being in Europe, and I'm calling you from not so sunny Brooklyn right now.
Excellent, Brooklyn. I myself am in Estonia. And before we get into the juicy topic of Testcontainers Desktop application and everything, last week I saw you in Las Vegas for a Spring One conference. Can you tell me a few words about it? How did it go? What AtomicJar did there? How Test Containers was represented in the community? How do you like it?
Well, that was a blast, really. Like it was amazing to see. First of all, it was amazing to see Spring One happening. Like it got delayed, or like got moved from December to summertime. Like the good news is that summertime is summertime, so it feels great. And I think despite it being Spring framework, summer matches Spring so well because I'm getting the same energy of like from both. And it was part of the bigger conference, like VMware Explore conference. But we had our cozy place for Spring One supporters, and we were standing next to Grado, next to Bellsoft and Axon IQ, and behind us were our friends from Microsoft. But it was great to see all the good friends from the Spring community, some ex-colleagues as well. And of course, the biggest highlight of the event for the event was Spring, like 20 years of Spring party. And that was a really cozy one. Just like seeing all the Spring people, they had a really good slideshow running in the background with kind of faces behind Spring and Spring ecosystem. That was really a nice touch added to the great conference. And of course, for us, for Atomic Jar and Test Containers, it didn't go unnoticed because we were mentioned in the keynote 4 times actually. Although it's 3 times plus my shirt appearance in the keynote where I talked about our experience of collaborating with the Spring team. But it was first of all great experience for me, but also like everything I said there, I meant that because it was a really fruitful and really exciting collaboration that we did in the latest release of Spring Boot. And we, of course, spent time after the conference because it's all conference driven to talk about the future version of Test Containers integration. And I can preview some of it later on this show, something that you and we didn't even align on, but that's the goal of live shows, to show something live and recent and so on and so forth.
Excellent. I'm honestly looking forward to it. If you don't know, the integration between Spring Boot and Test Containers that Sergey mentions is the recently added support into Spring Boot, where you can very easily use test containers to create local development environments. The same way you do this for integration tests, where you programmatically define your sort of service dependencies locally, you can do that for when you actually run the application, and then you can literally use it as if it was deployed to the actual environment. So allegedly, there are some potential improvements going on in that, in which I don't have actually any doubts. But we'll see it a little bit later. Right.
Yep.
I love very much that you mentioned the Spring party as a highlight of the conference. The hallway truck is always one of my favorite ones because you get the chance to talk to people, see what they think, rather than just looking at the slides and maybe seeing some prepared demos. But it's true, 20 years of Spring, 10 years of Spring Boot, which sounds like awful lot, but it still feels like a young framework where they can deliver improvements twice a year, major improvements for major versions. Right,
And
coming
it's
out of
supposed to celebrate that, by the way, like something that you mentioned, like 10 years of Spring Boot. You know, like it's a celebration moment, just like imagine, just like it existed for 10 years. And we're about to turn 9 in test containers. And like in 2 years, we'll be celebrating 10 years of test containers as well. But I don't know, I'm not celebrating. It reminds me about how old all of us are. And it's just crazy. Like when you think about it, it feels like it happened yesterday, the Spring Boot revolution. And they talked about it in the keynote. By the way, I encourage everyone to watch the keynote, the Spring Boot part, not my part, where they talk about how Spring Boot evolved and where it all started. And they start with code that uses Spring Framework and XML before Spring Boot. And then they migrated version to Spring Boot 1, to Spring Boot 2, to Spring Boot 3. It was really, first of all, like very good backward compatibility story. In fact, it was really nice to see that they can literally just take the same code base and migrate it to the new version of Spring Boot, starting with pre-Spring Boot era. But also, a great reminder of all the changes that happened in the Spring ecosystem with the introduction of Spring Boot. So definitely encourage everyone to watch the keynote.
Yeah, and if you want to feel nostalgic as well, you can go to the start100.spring.io to see Spring Boot initializer website as it was in the 1.0 release times, and then start 200.spring.io and check it out. My only, not to complain. One thing I wish for the conference presentations when people develop those sample applications is that they would put a little bit more attention to writing tests as well. Doesn't have to be a production quality code, but a few tests to show that you actually know how to do that and encourage healthy practices would be appreciated. Easy for me to say. My presentations are only tests.
But you made a very good point. Like we were shown how it's working by launching the application over and over. And I know that the keynote had to be like they had to run very, very fast. But something that I realized that they spent more time switching to the terminal, compiling the application, starting it, sending a request with Postman or sorry, it wasn't Postman. I think it was HTTP or something like that. But should they write a test, an integration test, they could demonstrate that the same test is passing even if you're upgrading your version of Spring Boot. So that's actually a very clever idea that not only because testing is good, but also it's the fastest way to show that your application is still working after you upgrade it.
Yeah. Yeah. Josh,
Completely
if you're
unbiased
listening,
opinion.
Josh, if you're listening, take notes. No, it's a great idea. We can see if we can implement this for some sort of a next edition of that presentation.
Speaking of Josh, one of the announcements that we did at the conference is that Josh Long became Test Containers champion. It's a no-brainer. He's been advocating Test Containers for so long, and he even uses Test Containers in his beautiful Spring Boot 3.1 presentation. And I also had my personal goal achieved because I remember watching Josh presenting his talks, and he was starting MongoDB or like Postgres or MongoDB for his talk with shell script. And I was just like, my eyes are bleeding. Like, Josh, like, why would you use a shell script? Like, why don't you do it from Java with test containers? And he made a good point. Like, he was really on point. That look, Sergey, my demos, like, they're super fast. Like, he's like one of the fastest, if not the fastest, in the wild west. And because of that, like, every second counts, every movement counts, and they must be running like super fast. And back then, yes, we had reusable containers, something that we added actually after his feedback partially. Um, but also, we weren't there yet with the integration with Spring. And now that the integration is so good, he proceeds by starting Postgres with test containers in his talk. And then later on, he uses it for demonstrating how to develop with Spring Boot, like the same beautiful Spring Boot talks that we all have seen at least once, that evolves over time. And I was exciting to see this new evolution of the talk where test containers is now part of the experience he's showing. That was really, really nice to see at the talk. So, true champion.
A true champion. There are a few things that I would like to unpack there. But I would start to preface the further questions with, if you haven't seen Josh's talk on Bootiful Spring Boot, it's probably available on YouTube. If you want to watch it live, I think one of the next appointments or events where he will be would be Java Zone next week in Oslo. I've seen him in the schedule. I put the heart next to the talk. So if you have a chance, do that or set a reminder to watch the video after. But one thing that you mentioned, Sergey, was Test Containers Champions. This is the program where AtomicJar and the Test Containers like core team recognizes external contributors to the community. Can you tell maybe a couple of words about how we came with the program and what are the goals and where are we taking it?
Oh, I can talk about the program forever, but I'll try to be short about it. That's an exciting step for us in our community building journey because test containers much more than just atomic jar writing some code in open source and shipping products. It's a community in a true sense of it, and it's not just you know a single vendor community. And there are some companies who are like that, but we treat test containers as a community. With many, many contributors to the community, and not only those who are contributing code, but also who are spreading the word, who are writing articles, who are giving talks, or writing books about test containers. So that's exciting. And obviously, we want to spotlight our true champions, like those who moves the needle for our communities, those who bring more members to the community, but also support those who are already in the community. And we've seen it done in other communities. Like obviously Java champions, of which both of us, like both of you and I, are part of, but also other communities such as I know Docker captains or Kotlin champions,
Heroes?
heroes, yeah, or Google developer experts. Like those programs exist for a reason, and not only to receive your swag every now and then and tell everyone that you're a champion, but really because it's always based on your past achievements, not really on like your future achievements, which is good and great. So it's not just like, oh, this person could be, like, is very influential, so we'll invite them to the program, so they will start telling everyone about our product, not our project, not really like that, but rather a recognition of someone's achievements in community building. And we are building this community together. Like we won't be here where we are right now without the support from our previously unnamed champions. But in reality, what it means is that those people were passionate about the project and they just shared their love, like test containers love, with others. And frankly, that's how I started with test containers too. Because I mean, obviously, I'm not the original creator of test containers. The original creator of test containers is Richard Norris. But I joined the project shortly after he open sourced it. More than 8 years ago. It feels like really, really crazy when you think about it. And it was a crazy ride as well. But like the key here is that other than the code contributions that I was doing, I was also participating in conferences and really building my public speaking muscle, talking about test containers and telling everyone, look, I enjoyed this solution. I think you enjoy it too. And that's what other champions, or like that's what our champions did to the project as well. And we are forever thankful, and we enormously appreciate their efforts on advocating test containers to their networks.
Yeah. And just to add to that, if you're watching and you would like to learn about test containers, not from, for example, yours truly or from Sergei, go to testcontainers.com/community champions, and there are a list of people whose opinion we value, in whose expertise we trust, and you can find their traces in the community. You can find their materials. You can talk to them, connect. I'm sure they'll be happy to answer a couple of questions, and we at AtomicJar absolutely support that.
And if you're new to test containers communities, then just by looking at that page, you probably can also make your own assessment of the popularity of the project, because with champions from VMware, from Netflix, from IBM, from Neo4j, from other big companies, you can clearly tell that you know the industry slowly but surely is adopting test containers everywhere, and that makes me very, very excited, because that's how I want to see people test their software.
Yeah, me as well. I just want to people see test their software in
That's a
general.
great start.
Yeah. Right. I think now is the right time to jump into the promised core topic of today's session, which is Testcontainers Desktop application and its recent announcement that happened last week. So the stage is yours. Could you maybe introduce what the Testcontainers Desktop application is, what's the goals, and why we did it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, more than happy to. So it's like if you are an existing user of test containers, you probably have like a few things you wish test containers supported, but there were certain limitations that we could never do in the open source side of things, or it was just too hard for us to do as part of the library, because library is ephemeral by its definition, and it can start with some simple things like, I don't know, fixed ports. Like, could we let's say instruct Docker to build on fixed ports? Yes, we could, and you could do that too. There is low API called with create container modifier, and it's in Java and other languages that test container supports have similar constructs for that. But the problem was that, and I even wrote an article on this topic, because people think that we care about the ports, and yes, port conflicts are painful, and nobody wants to deal with them. But there is even more. Like, you are hard coding not only the port when you rely on it, you're also hard coding the host, and it won't work on CI environments where Docker is becoming more and more of a like normal thing of running it, because more and more CIs are becoming containerized. And even locally, not every way of running Docker would have your ports assigned to the local host. And our motto, like our hard opinion in test containers, is that we only implement things that will work reliably for everyone. We don't want to have half working features. We don't want features that will work on, I know, Mac, but won't work on Windows, because consistency is key here. Like, you don't want your testing tool to be inconsistent, to be flaky, to be causing issues when you're adopting it with the rest of the team, because it's very collaborative. Like, test containers is very collaborative, means that you should always think about others who will be using the same code that you're writing, the same task that you're writing. But back to the origin of Testcontainers Desktop and how we came to the idea. We always had this. We wish we had an application we could implement certain features in, and that was a common topic throughout this 8 years of building test containers. And when we start AtomicJar and we start building our flagship product called Testcontainers Cloud, that allows you to run the same test containers based tests, but without Docker on your machine, and running the containers in the cloud and having visibility through dashboards and other features, we realized that what we have built, that Testcontainers Cloud desktop application, is 99% of what we needed to start building those desktop features for the rest of the test containers users who are not necessarily running with Testcontainers Cloud, or maybe not yet, but would still benefit from them. And we had a choice. For some companies, it would be a tough choice. For us, it was an easy choice, because we do prioritize community, is whether we start embedding those features into our commercial desktop application, or we repurpose it. We turn it, we change it from Testcontainers Cloud Desktop. We donate it to the community as Testcontainers Desktop free application, with those features that we always wanted to build included into it. And that's what we did. It was an easy choice for us to have this foundation for building different features. And we did the initial release with some of the pains that we observed in the community solved, such as fixed ports or debugging of containers and preventing them from stopping when you need to inspect the state, or an easy ability to switch reusable containers on and off. Speaking of reusable containers, I was like I wrote the original prototype for them, and in the original prototype, we were like, it would be so much easier if we had a stateful application running, so we could track containers, we could track networks, we could support like containers that are connected with networks, but we couldn't because you start your test containers based session and you have the state. You stop it and state is gone, and there isn't much opportunities for persistence. Now that we have Testcontainers Desktop, it changes the game because now we can have this application that is always running. Another feature of it is an ability to switch your local runtimes very easily. So if you were to change from, let's say, Docker Desktop to OrbStack or to Kalima or Podman or anything else, really, previously you had to modify testcontainers.properties. And it was especially painful for organizations who adopted, let's say, Podman. Like, how do we make everyone use it with Podman? And then they had to ask everyone to change their testcontainers.properties file. But with Testcontainers Desktop, it's one click away, and you can easily switch the runtimes. I will also preview something that we never even spoke publicly later in this live stream. So stay till the end or till the middle of the stream if you want to see it. But the key here is the foundation for us to build many more features that will make your test containers experience even better. And of course, it comes with a selector for running with Test Containers Cloud to make it easy for you to switch between the runtimes. And the free tier that we provide for Test Containers Cloud even includes 500 minutes as of today of free Test Containers Cloud usage. So when you need to burst to the cloud, you can easily do that, and your laptop will no longer be burning your labs.
That's a good joke there, and it's a great overview. Just to summarize, right? It's a free application. It's a menu system tray sort of an application that previously we had as the Test Containers Cloud client. Now it is packed with developer-oriented features, and you went through the list of that.
Perhaps we could showcase it, like we are doing live streams. So
can you showcase? Or do you want me to showcase?
Yes, I still can. I still understand what's happening on the screen when someone shows the demo of what we're doing. So I'll do my best. I'll try my best to do that.
Very good. All right, let's share your screen and then dive into a quick recap of Testcontainers Desktop application features.
Sounds great.
Okay, right. We have your IDE open.
Good to know that screen sharing is working. So I will start just by pointing us to the fact that I'm running Testcontainers Desktop. Again, free application does require you to log in, but that's the only cost you pay right now. And we are planning to add anonymous access as well. But what I have here, I have a menu bar application. There is no UI. There is no Electron in it, by the way. Like, don't worry, it won't steal your RAM. We are trying to be as resource efficient as possible, and there are no windows at all, actually. Like, that's the only interaction you have with it is this tiny menu bar application. It works on Mac, Windows, and even Linux for those who want to run on Linux. But those features that I'm about to show, they make sense even on Linux. So that makes me very, very excited. So I'll switch to Testcontainers Cloud just because why not? And I'm currently sharing my screen, so I want to make sure that I have enough CPU so my stream won't be corrupted. And what I have here is have a rather simple test, like unit test basically, but with real dependencies, where I'm starting Redis with test containers. And please ignore this one for now. And I proceed just instantiating my repository and running some tests. In fact, I have two tests here. One of them will just ensure that the database is empty because task container starts ephemeral instances, meaning that each time you start your task, you get a new instance, which is very exciting because data corruption is a huge issue actually. And another one, like I'm a big fan of Redis. I've been using it so many times myself, and I also have a lot of respect for the creator of Redis, whom I treat as one of the best developers out there. Um, and I was curious, like, what happens when you attempt to increment, a key that's already at long max value? Like, I didn't know the answer really, and I was just like, okay, what options do I have? Like, I could go and read the documentation, but first of all, documentation is always current, and I want to know that the version of Redis that I'm using, is behaving like I will discover. Another option would be to, start some local Docker containers and then connect Redis client to it, blah, blah, blah. But that's too much effort. And it's been a while since I started local Docker container, to be honest, now that I'm using test containers everywhere. But option number 3, I can just use test containers. I can write a test for it. And it's even better because now I can document the behavior. I could literally have it as runnable behavior, as a test. And when my team updates Redis version to, a higher version, then this test will change the behavior if the behavior of the database had changed. So it's the best way of documenting your findings, but also edge cases and certain things that you won't be able to, let's say, test with integration test. Because if I were to test it with integration test, I would have to send long max value HTTP calls to my application just before I can test the last one. So obviously not something I want to do in my integration test. So now let me run this test just as usual. And it's a standard test containers based test. So it's going to run as usual. And the test is green. Like one of the tests is green, and the other one is red. But the key here is the test ran, and it ran really fast, despite it being code environment that I just provisioned Testcontainers Cloud, so I didn't have to wait for anything. Basically, I could get going as part of this live stream. And if I restart it, I now have a running environment. So as you can see, it was just basically like less than a second experience, or maybe like 1 second experience. So very fast iteration cycle. If we look at the logs and we see that, okay, we're running with Testcontainers Cloud, what we'll see here, empty if null key passed, not surprised here. And test limits test failed. And I would expect it to fail, actually. Like, I should change the test to expect the failure, but I wanted to explore the behavior, so I proceeded with just adding, okay, I code, and then I can change my code to something like, assertions, because assert J rules, and they're thrown by, la la la, so I can improve this test. But that's not the key here. What we're seeing here is that, okay, increment or decrement would overflow error. Nice. So apparently there is a special check, there is a guard in Redis for this particular behavior. The thing is, I'm an engineer, and I don't trust code, to be honest, because I know that code is written by people. So I want to go and check that I didn't break the state of my application. Like, it didn't actually overflow. Yes, there is an error, but maybe there was a bug in Redis, although would not inspect bugs in Redis, that would still increment it, but then throw an error. So I want to inspect the internal state. How do I do that? Or like, how would you do that, especially before Testcontainers Desktop?
I would put a breakpoint and debug it.
That's a good one. Although, like, there are no statements after the increment, so not really a good, like, there's no really a good place to put a breakpoint. And we could step through, but yeah, still less than
less than ideal. But
the way I did it before, and I literally did it multiple times, like many times, is I would run the test, I would do docker ps, okay, I would docker exec id redis cli. Oh, okay, the container is already gone. Why it's already gone? Because we are nope, not this one. We are using @container annotation that will start, but also stop the container after it started. We can proceed by removing @container annotation, and probably we'll have to remove this one now. We would need to do something like ready start, because Ryuk will take care of it even if we never stopped it in code. So that's one of the features of test containers. But that's quite involved. Like, I don't want to change my tasks if I just want to debug them, because then you also need to revert the change before committing, and then you accidentally committed, blah, blah, blah. So, and this is where one of the Testcontainers Desktop features kicks in. I can freeze container shutdown. So I say freeze container shutdown. I run the same test, and let's look at what happens now. We run the same test, and now we receive a notification. I'm running a dev build of Testcontainers Desktop because I wanted to show you something exciting. Otherwise, you would receive a normal notification in the notification bar. But what we're seeing here is that, okay, container with image Redis Alpine is frozen. So I can copy its ID, for example, and go and do docker exec it Redis CLI. I'm no longer in a rush because I know that it's running, it's waiting for me to do the inspection, and I can do, let's say, keys. Okay, it's there. So let's do get all. And we see that the field is still set to long max value. Okay, so we can trust the Redis developers, unsurprisingly, but it also gives us more confidence that it's behaving like it should behave. So that's cool. I mean, we could also write a test for that and verify that the previous value of the key is still the same. But we are talking about exploration. We're talking about discovery. We're talking about playing with things. And sometimes we do want to go and like exec some commands on a running container. But execing into a container, and I got lucky because Redis CLI is part of the Redis container. Sometimes it's not really convenient. Like sometimes you would rather prefer to use tools on your local machine. And before I spoil my demo, let me just fix something. So what I have on my machine, I have Redis CLI, which is a tool that you can use to connect to Redis. And if I were to be doing like 10 years ago, I would probably have Redis running on my machine on localhost 6379. So I would just run rdcli and I would connect to Redis because it defaults to connecting to localhost 6379. But with test containers, and if we inspect the container, you will see that Redis is running. So the port 6379 is mapped to port 32779. So I'll need to do something like Redis CLI port, and now it works. So I can do the same operation and everything's working. The thing is, I restart my test and now I get a new port, and this is quite involved. But another feature that we added is called services that allows you to define services and target target images and assign them to ports on your machine to guarantee that they're running on localhost. And those are soft fixed ports, meaning that if you already have something running on that port, it won't break your task, it won't break your workflow. It will just gracefully degrade, which is great because we are living in the world of microservices where there is a bunch of services. Each one of them have their own databases. You're switching between microservices because you need to fix a bug in one and then continue working on another. You don't want to deal with port conflicts. But what I have here, I have a simple TOML file that says, okay, port 6379. By the way, you don't need container port here. You can avoid, like you can drop it if it's the same as target port, and port 8081 target Redis or target any container with Redis image. As simple as that. You can also do label selectors, and you can say, like say, app equals Redis. But for me, it's just like I want to target any Redis image. And now,
yeah, makes sense, right? Like you want Redis tools to work with Redises, so anything that is Redis could respond as a Redis.
It's hard to argue with that, indeed. And now, if I return to my terminal, or even some IDE tools that would rely on fixed port, I can return here and I can run rdcli again, but this time it connected to 6379. So I'm still having my test running. I don't need to restart my test for that. The test is still running, which is important because when you're debugging flaky tests, then you ideally want to catch that flake and freeze it. Just like, okay, don't move. I need to debug you. I need to see what's inside the database. And now we can run the same operations. And the best thing is that let's let's release the test, and boom, it finished. So we're not breaking your tests; they remain running, and when you unfreeze, it continues running. I'll enable the freeze again just to demonstrate what I meant, but let me restart the test. Okay, new container with new ID, with new port, and we can see that the new port is 32782, and the previous one we were using is 32779. But the key here is that I run rdcli, and now I'm connected again. Because even if you restart containers, we'll discover that you restart containers and reconnect again. So you get the best of both worlds. You get all the convenience of local tools for debugging and the convenience of test containers running everything on random ports. So you don't need to worry about that. But another thing is we talked about the reusable containers, and we talked about its current state that is experimental, that is like here be Dragon's implementation basically, and also it's inconvenient to configure it. And wow, it's a tiny feature when it comes to the implementation. We added this flag that enables you to enable and disable it quite easily. And what I'm showcasing here is Spring Boot's first-class support for test containers. So you can define test containers as beans. And for those that are supported out of the box, you can also annotate it with add service connection. And Spring Boot will connect it to the main application. So you don't need to do the wiring, you don't need to do dynamic property source, you don't need to do initializers, none of that. And I promised something at the beginning of the call that I also showcase some of the exploration we did with the Spring Boot team. And what we explored the possibility of adding property contributors. So let's say Redis has no type. There is no Redis container. So obviously Spring team cannot support service connection for it unless you force it to be Redis service connection. But you don't have to. You might as well just create a properties contributor that takes the same dynamic property registry as a static method, but now it's part of your configuration. And you can even refer to Redis doing like bean references, or you have all the flexibility of the Spring context here. And you can do it like this, and it will still work. And I'm very excited about this API, and I hope you're excited too. And another change that will be coming in Spring Boot 3.2 is parallel start of those containers. Because unless they have dependencies that you can define with, let's say, depends on Postgres, unless you have those dependencies, you don't need to start them sequentially. You would rather start everything faster because we talk about seconds of iterations. And we want to move as fast as possible, and test containers enables you to move as fast as possible. So if I run this test without the flag here, you'll see is that containers will be started and new images will be downloaded and stuff like this. And they do start fast with Testcontainers Cloud, so it's not a big deal, but we want to move even faster. So let me run it once. We run it once, we download the images, and the tests are running. Now I restart this test. The images are downloaded, but the containers would still be starting, and we still need to start containers again. It's much faster than the previous run because we have the images downloaded. But if you look at the output, you will notice that Kafka took 4 seconds to start, which is very impressive, by the way. And the fact that it starts so fast is because we're running on bare metal instances, basically. So we're running it on Linux, on bare metal, so you get the most out of Docker on Linux. But now we have to wait 4 seconds each time we restart our test, which is, for those who are shipping once a quarter, maybe nothing. But for us, modern developers, we don't want to wait for 4 seconds where we can wait for 0 seconds or some milliseconds. And I just enabled the reusable containers here. If I restart it, it will start the containers again because previous containers were terminated. No magic here. We had to start a new set of containers. But this time, if we inspect Docker PS, you see that they remain running and there is no Ryuk, meaning that Ryuk is no longer managing their lifecycle. Now they are on their own. But what it means for us developers is that we can restart the test And look how fast it will go. Much faster. Because this time, if we inspect the same container started in, then you'll see that Kafka started in like 300 milliseconds. That was just us discovering already running container, testing it that it's still running. As in, you can still, I don't know, connect to the port or the logs contain the necessary line. So it's still reliable. And you won't be getting like half working containers. So we still need to perform those checks, but it's 10 times faster or even more now that we have reusable containers enabled. And it's just one click away in the UI.
That's amazing.
I'm not sure about you, Oleg, but I always struggled to demo this feature, like reusable containers feature, because I had to go and edit my Testcontainers properties. So what do you think about that tiny checkbox?
It's amazing. One of the more embarrassing demo fails in my public speaking career, in the recent like year or so, came from the fact that I edited the test containers properties file on stream because my reusable containers property was false there, and I mistyped the exit command in Vi, and instead of saving the file, it just put it in the background, and then it didn't save the property,
Yeah.
and I was debugging it on stage, and it was not great. So I personally appreciate a checkbox very much.
Okay, since we are sharing war stories, let me share mine. I was presenting at JokerConf in 2018, I think, or 2017. That is a lovely conference in the beautiful city of St. Petersburg. And what happened is I accepted the challenge. I accepted the challenge of does test containers needs to be running on my machine, like with Docker running on my machine. And I basically hinted at the possibility of doing test containers cloud, like how many, like 6 years ago. And what I did, I started an instance in Amsterdam on DigitalOcean or something like that. And I configured test containers to target that Docker instance instead of my local one. And it worked. It just worked. Just like everyone was really impressed. And someone from the audience asked me about another test containers feature in the Selenium module, which is video recording. And I was just like, sure, you can do video recording with test containers when you're using it with Selenium. Not the most popular use case, but one of them. So just like, sure, why not? Let's test that. I added the necessary lines, which is just like 2 lines of code, basically, like with video recording, record all, and not just failed. And I couldn't find the files. Like they were supposed to be in my build folder, and I couldn't find them. I was just like, what's going on? So I started debugging on stage, same experience, and I was just like, yeah, sir, I don't know what's happening. Usually they work, and we had a bug that we fixed with VNC recorders that wasn't flushing to the file system. So I was just like, maybe it's the same bug again or something like that. And of course, shortly after leaving the presentation room, I realized that it worked. Just the files were written in Amsterdam. I was standing on stage in St. Petersburg, and files were there in the data center in Amsterdam, remotely, available and stored. But obviously, they wouldn't be on my machine because now it's network connection. It's not the same file system. And it was so embarrassing. But it also led to an improvement that we did in the Selenium module that now we're using copy API instead of file system API. And now instead of storing the files and like expecting them to be on the file system, we just copy them from the container. So even if you're running things with a remote execution, such as Testcontainers Cloud or Docker and Docker, or your in-house remote Docker solution, it would still work. But speaking of war stories,
Yeah, that's a good proper fun. I can imagine that it was fairly stressful trying to debug things that you expect to work. But luckily, it led to improvements. And luckily for me, I have a checkbox now, so I'm very confident in my in demoing that particular use case.
I hope our users will find it helpful too.
Yeah, if you're watching and you haven't tried Testcontainers Desktop, this is actually a good place to tell you that you can go to testcontainers.com/desktop, download the app, and use it on your test containers-based setups. Run your tests with it, see if you like the features, see how and what is happening. Do you have to use Testcontainers Cloud with it?
No, as I say, now it's all things test containers and test containers desktop. And actually, let me demonstrate it to you. I usually don't have Docker running on my machine, like any Docker being like, I don't know, Docker Desktop, OrbStack, Rancher, and others, or Podman. But this time, let me launch one of my most favorite, like second favorite way of running test containers on my laptop, which is OrbStack with local OrbStack. First one, obviously, is Testcontainers Cloud, but we talked enough about that. So I just launched OrbStack, and as you can see, I don't have containers running there. I can Docker PS. It still works. The reason why it still works because I'm using Testcontainers Cloud context. So I can do Docker context, use TCC, and I'm connected to Testcontainers Desktop basically, and Testcontainers Cloud in particular. I can then do Docker context, use OrbStack, and then Docker PS. Okay, no containers running, so it's very convenient, but I'll switch back to Testcontainers Desktop, which is the entry point for all things test containers and Docker for me on my machine. So we have OrbStack running here. Now, before Testcontainers Desktop, you would have to set Testcontainers properties or ask OrbStack to override Docker socket, and like you had to do some configurations there, or rely on OrbStack's way of configuring global things that I don't really appreciate, to be honest. And in fact, I even in a sec. Let me. You will thank me later. But yes, shout out to the OrbStack developer, whom you can find on Twitter. But Danny is so responsible for feature requests, and I just asked him to make Docker context after setting configurable. So if you don't want it to automatically set the context and override global things, then now there is a checkbox for that. And just look at the timing. Like July 28th, I asked for it. July 28th, like 8 hours later, it's already there in the product. That's amazing. But that's not the point here. The point here is that now it's as simple as switching to OrbStack from this run containers locally menu. So OrbStack, done. Now I switch back to my IDE. Let me restart my test. We are pulling the containers because, as I say, like I'm not running it locally, so I think I'm running this demo first time with OrbStack on my machine actually. But luckily, I have fast enough connection because some of us don't. This is where also Testcontainers Cloud becomes very helpful. But I do have a decent connection, so let's give it a second to download the images. And once the images are downloaded, boom, the tests are running now. And as we can see from the log, it's no longer saying Testcontainers Cloud. It says server version 24.0.5, and operation system is OrbStack, clearly meaning that we are now running it with OrbStack instead of Testcontainers Cloud, with a simple click in the UI.
Nice. Would this work with other Docker implementations as well?
Yep, it works with Rancher. It works with Docker Desktop. It works with Podman, assuming you have context set, because the way it's implemented is you need to have context here. We of course exclude our own context, and the reason why we see so many TCC contexts here is because we also support turbo mode in Testcontainers Cloud, where you can have multiple sets of containers, and you can run your tests in parallel, and they won't be fighting for the same state, which is another exciting feature. But as soon as you have context here, and as you can see, I also have Kalima here. You can use it with Testcontainers Desktop. And I see a comment from Simon, who is saying that just the ease of swapping out to a cloud container is so nice, especially when you have a broken work laptop, teeny SSD. Oh yeah, been there, done that. Thanks for this feedback. It's indeed that easy.
Yeah, 100%. The cloud is more scalable than your local workstation for 100% of cases. So with parallelization opportunities or just having a beefier machine in the cloud, with a switch of a button, you can run it locally, but when you need a burst, or if you want to have a fully reproducible environment, It's just literally, 2 clicks away. Nice.
And there is one more thing. And I kind of hinted at demoing something that wasn't even publicly talked about. But otherwise, like, what's the point of those live streams? You all know about all the stuff we are doing anyways. We are so active on Twitter. But let me show you something exclusive, basically, just for those who are participating in the live stream. So to fall back to local environment, sometimes you do want to run things locally, be it because you're on a like, I don't know, on an airplane or what's not, or maybe you just like you prefer to run things locally. I'm fine with that. And in fact, Testcontainers Desktop makes it easy to benefit from some of the Testcontainers Cloud features, even if you're running locally. So I just had this demo ran on Testcontainers Cloud, and then we switched to Testcontainers running with the local orb stack. But what we can do now, we can go to Testcontainers Cloud dashboard and see those sessions here. So as you can see, here is my cloud session. And shortly after, because eventual consistency was a win, my local session will arrive as well. But let me show you something. I had to start OrbStack to use Testcontainers Cloud, Testcontainers locally. And OrbStack is amazing, but I'm not a big fan of having too many things on my machine. So let me quit OrbStack and let me do Docker PS. And obviously Docker PS will no longer work because now we are targeting OrbStack that is no longer running. So still OrbStack, but it's not running anymore. And what we are experimenting with, so we're experimenting with adding an embedded runtime. And if I click embedded runtime, then it will take a few seconds for it to start because we start and stop it. So you don't have to run it 24/7 if you're running Testcontainers Desktop 24/7. And eventually we'll also add a feature to passivate it as well, similar to how we passivate Testcontainers Cloud sessions. But let me do Docker PS again. And let's also look at the virtual machine service. And what you see here is that it only uses like 1.8 gigs of RAM, which is very interesting because that's not how much I provisioned. We're using Lima under the hood. So if you do Lima list, then you'll see 6 gigs of RAM. But because we're using virtualization framework from macOS, and it's currently only available on macOS, it will dynamically expand the RAM as you go. So you don't need to allocate, or like you don't need to limit the RAM if you need to run, Chrome and Slack and others, and it will expand it as you go. And with passivation, it will restart it and bring it down to small value again. But now, if I run Docker PS, no containers running, let me run my test. I run my test again, and this is like true bleeding edge stuff, by the way. Like it's still in a pull request, so I was just so eager to show it to the community because I think that is something super exciting.
It is exciting. It works. Green tests. And we've seen those tests fail. Did we see those tests fail? Yes, we did. So we know that they are showing something.
And if we inspect the output, just to confirm that it's not OrbStack or something and not Testcontainers Cloud. So same Docker version running on the server. I think it's Docker version. I don't know, actually. And the operation system is Alpine Linux now because we're using Lima for that. And we are reusing parts of Colima, but we improved the compatibility because those of you who are using Testcontainers with Colima, and let's demonstrate that. Colima start. Let's start Colima and let's try Testcontainers with Colima. And it's going to take around the same amount of time to start Colima. And as soon as it's started, I will be able to switch to Colima here. There is my experimental Colima TCC that we should really ignore. But another cool thing is that this list is dynamic. So when you start and stop your runtimes, we'll detect them. So nothing you need to do, like you need to restart Testcontainers Desktop. So I'm selecting Colima. I go here and let me run this test. This test will be using Ryuk because it's not using reusable containers. It will download the images. It will start the thing. Okay, it's container freeze is enabled, so let me disable it actually. It ran. Oh, very nice. And the things that I wanted to show. Okay, yeah, those are connection resets and those port-related issues. Like usually you would also have Ryuk complaining about. Let me try it again. Yes. Oh yes, that's my favorite one. Like if you ever use test containers with Kalima, that's an indicator that you're using test containers with Kalima. Those warnings that Ryuk couldn't connect to this port. And the reason why it's happening is because Kalima does port forwarding, and when it port forwards, it would run a job every 5 seconds and scan your IP tables in the VM. And for exposed ports, it would do the port forwarding. For those who are not exposed, it won't. But the key here is 5 seconds, which means that you are at the mercy of 5 seconds interval. And it can be that you are super close to 5 seconds, so it will re-expose the port as soon as the container started. Or sometimes you have to wait up to 5 seconds for a container to start. And we don't want to have those warnings in our code, right? Like we want beautiful, no warnings, no errors test output. But that's how Kalima works, because it's not aware of test containers, and it's not even like that deep integrated into Docker ecosystem, actually, surprisingly. But let me switch it to our embedded runtime that will once again start, because it wasn't running before. So it will start a new virtual machine service in a matter of seconds. And it's starting, and it started. Kalima is running with QEMU, by the way, which means that it's not as fast as the virtualization framework that OrbStack is using. This is why OrbStack is so fast. And now I just restart this test. Look, no more warnings. Just because we know how to handle ports for test containers, and we are using a lot of code from Testcontainers Cloud here just to make it working on local. But I'm super excited about this experience. I'm super excited about the future of Testcontainers Desktop, where you can have batteries included experience. You just install Testcontainers Desktop, and you can run your Testcontainers test. You don't need to install anything else. Well, other than Lima, like brew install Lima, but that's a component that Podman, Rancher Desktop, Kalima, Testcontainers Desktop, and I'm not sure about Docker Desktop. I don't think they use Lima, but everyone else uses. So it's a safe dependency for everyone. And you probably already have it on your machine if you were using any other mean of running Docker on your machine other than Docker Desktop.
Nice. This is very cool. This got way deeper in the implementation details of test containers and different Docker runtimes that I expected, but it was very, very interesting to see. And I'm looking forward to trying out this potential embedded runtime. Do you have any? Can you share any other nuggets of maybe roadmap? What would be some other favorite features of yours for the Testcontainers Desktop?
Oh, totally. Like one of the features that is like I told you to ignore Commander here, but actually let me show it, and I almost forgot to show it because that's an exciting one. So we were using CLI to connect to Redis and to inspect internal state, which is okay. Like like most of us are used to CLIs or some database clients, but I'm a browser guy, to be honest. Like like everything I'm doing in the browser, and I would rather have a web page to open. And remember, in our service definition, we had port. Can I make it bigger? Nope. Okay, no. Port 8081 exposed as well, but Redis isn't running on port 8081. But it doesn't mean that we cannot inject certain things into target container. And in this case, I'm injecting Redis Commander, which is an open source tool for visualizing Redis in a browser, Redis state in a browser. And if I run the same test again, so we wait
And
for,
freeze it.
I
You
think
need to freeze it.
I already started
Okay.
it. But thanks for the reminder. I do tend to forget to do that. So container is frozen. But what I can do now, I can go and do localhost 8081, and I'm presented with the UI for my Redis that I can also restart when I start my tests. And there is even some nice kind of command line access in the browser. This isn't our feature. It's just us plugging the ecosystem of Redis into test containers experience. But this wouldn't be possible, or it would be really hard to do without the services abstraction that we have now. And the way we want to evolve services, we want to make this experience an an experience that you get out of the box, meaning that if you're developing with Redis, we'll attach some helpers to Redis, and you always know that there is some helper running that allows you to see, like inside Redis, inside Postgres, inside Kafka, inside anything else. And there are many great products out there that help you debug your databases. So we want to evolve it in the direction of true services where it isn't just about forward this port, but it will also make it easy to have those sidecars. But also, we should make it easy to see the logs of your containers, and we'll make it easy to see the logs of your containers. Open a terminal with SSH session in your container. Doesn't really like, no matter if it's running locally or in the cloud, it's all the same. Oh, and if I can flex my internet connection, because one of our Testcontainers Cloud data centers is in New York, meaning that it's super close to me, and my latency to it is just like less than 20 milliseconds, and sometimes it goes below 6 milliseconds. But it also means that, don't worry, we're not running Testcontainers Cloud in a single data center, but it's a pretty wide network of points of presence.
Right. I love it. I love how the open source libraries, the Testcontainers Desktop application for tooling, the abstraction for services connected with the larger ecosystem of tooling for the technologies that you run in test containers and Testcontainers Cloud come together into this really nice, really neat developer experience for working with your integration tasks or with your local development environment setups powered by test containers and this thing. Right. Thank you very much, Sergei. This was a blast. It was really, really good to see the demos. Everything worked, I think. So that was good. It wasn't scripted. I was a little bit nervous, to be honest, but it went well. Thank you, everyone, for watching. If you have any questions, now is a good time to ask them. If you have any questions and watching this as a recording, please join the Testcontainers community Slack workspace. You can find the link in the description. And the team is hanging out there. The community of people who use Testcontainers are hanging out there. There are channels for different language implementations, for working with desktop, specifically for working with Testcontainers Cloud. You can ask your questions there, and we'll be happy to connect and answer them.
And if I may,
yeah,
to conclude, the reason why I'm never worried about demoing latest and greatest state of what we do here at AtomicJar is that, we tell others to like develop with confidence and ship with confidence, and we do happen to write some tests too. But the key here is that we try to follow it from inside, like this approach from inside, where we know that our stuff is working because we tested it, and this is why I could just take the latest build of our system and like go and demo it because I think that's the right approach. Like, we as developers, we should have the confidence. It shouldn't be a norm where we are afraid of demoing something. It should be that it must work unless it doesn't, but then it's something exceptional. And I hope that what we are creating here with Testcontainers, with Testcontainers Desktop and Testcontainers Cloud will allow more developers out there to follow the same approach. And if you liked what you saw, if you're watching this recording, I'm a Twitter person. Let's have 5 seconds of silence for Twitter. Okay, I'm joking. Like, it's sad to see Twitter fading away, but if you're still on Twitter, I would really appreciate if you tweet about some of the stuff that you just saw at the live stream or in the recording, because that's how we know that stuff we are doing is helpful for someone. And Simon, thank you so much for your feedback in the chat and your comments. They make those live streams run much better when you know that someone's listening, someone's watching, but someone's also appreciating what you're doing. So just want to say thank you to our community. And I have a lot of passion because I know what we are doing is going to be helpful for at least one person in the world. That's already exciting for me.
I'm confident it's going to be useful and appreciated by more than one person in the world, more than hundreds and even thousands. The test containers community is very vibrant, very large, and very helpful. It's a blessing to be working with you. By you, I mean community, and not just you personally. Right. So we are at time. This was it. We covered Testcontainers Desktop. We talked a little bit about the Testcontainers Champions, Community Champions program, and our recent experiences with Spring One at VMware Explore, and integration with Spring Boot and Testcontainers. Stay tuned, follow the channels, and happy testing.
Thanks for having me, Oleg. It was a blast. Thank you.